Okay. All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming out today. I really appreciate your time. So this is the panel discussion on the physics majors in the workforce. And this is a joint session between the Society of Physics Students Zone 7 and the Ohio Region Section American Physical Society meeting. I wanted to upfront just thank Professor Day for helping to co-organize the session here. It's been it was a really great idea. Let's see. So why don't I go ahead? I'll introduce the panelists, and then I've got a few questions here, and then if people have other questions, please put them in the chat box. First of all, I'll introduce myself. So my name is Ron Kumon. I'm a associate professor in the physics department at Kettering University in Flint, Michigan. And I should also introduce Grant Mathias. He is the Associate Zone Councilor for Zone 7, and he's from Grove City College. Did you want to say anything, Grant?
Yeah, thank you guys all for being here. Looking forward to it.
Great, thank you. And let's see, so I'll go ahead and introduce the panelists. So Spencer Furin he graduated from John Carroll University in 2017 with a Bachelor of Science degree in engineering physics and minors in history and Catholic studies. After graduation, he worked briefly as a fire protection engineer for Osborne Engineering, a Cleveland-based building design firm. In early 2018, he moved to his current position as an electrical engineer in the Power Architecture and Analysis branch of the NASA Glenn Research Center. Spencer works primarily on computer modeling and simulation of spacecraft electrical power systems, primarily for Orion, which is NASA's new human-rated deep space exploration vehicle. So thank you for coming. Next up, I want to introduce Sally Dahger. She received her bachelor's in applied physics from Kettering University in 2018 and is currently pursuing her master's in mechanical engineering from the University of Michigan. While at Kettering, she worked as a co-op at Vallejo, which is a global tier 1 automotive supplier, where she completed rotations across different functions and found a passion for fluid and thermal simulations. After deciding that industry was a good fit for her career, she joined Vallejo as a simulation engineer upon graduation. Currently, she is a cabin comfort engineer at General Motors, where she is responsible for using computer-aided engineering for building fluid and thermal simulations for automotive vehicles to model the warm-up and cool-down for occupants in the vehicles. I should also mention that Sally was a previous president of the B Section Physics Club for 2 years between 2015 and 2017, and also a former Associate Zone Councilor for Zone 7 during the 2016-2017 academic year. I should mention Spencer was also involved with Society of Physics students at John Carroll. Forgot to mention that. And then finally, I'd like to introduce Nathaniel Mosher. He completed his applied physics degree from Kettering University in 2013. While at Kettering, he did co-ops for a nuclear power plant and also for Harman Kardon. They're best known probably for their speaker systems. After leaving the university, Nathaniel joined the Akebono Brake Corporation as a NVH, which is a noise, vibration, and harshness engineer, and he's still currently working there. And Nathaniel was also involved with the Society of Physics Students. He was the president of the B Section Kettering Physics Club during the 2012-2013 year. So I want to thank you all for coming today. So I wanted to start off here with just a few questions and get your response. So this panel is specifically focused on physics majors who didn't go to graduate school right away, but went to the workforce. That was the theme for the panel. So I thought I would ask you to start off with, based on your undergraduate experience, what kind of classes did you find to be most valuable in the jobs that you had after you graduated, or that you're in between then and now, I guess? What kind of classes in the physics degree, I guess, would you maybe recommend to students going forward? Maybe I want to take that one to start.
Yeah, I can. In my work, I'm a test engineer. So so just a little, I guess a brief thing about NVH is that we do a lot of testing of brake systems for noise, essentially, and vibration as well. But so for me, probably the most valuable physics class I took was acoustics testing and modeling, because it was focused on hands-on testing, building procedures, analyzing the results, and just like the full process. And that's essentially what I do day to day. So for me, I think in the workforce, a lot of times if you're hands-on, like a test engineer a lot is, getting that practical, real kind of classwork in is extremely helpful for me. And so, in fact, some of the equipment I learned in that class probably got me my job, specifically the laser vibrometer. But yeah, so.
Yeah, I kind of want to extend off what Nathaniel said. A lot of the acoustics classes are really applicable in industry because sound and vibration is, it's applicable for any product that you want to put into the market. So that's a really strong tool that you can use. But I think the computers and physics class for me was a really big advantage, just knowing those tools like MATLAB and coding. It doesn't matter whether you're looking at theoretical physics or products in the industry, that's always going to be useful. And people love to see it when you go into industry. Those tools are used everywhere. So I think understanding MATLAB, Java is also really applicable. Just looking at different computational tools, I think is really helpful.
Yeah, and I'll second that. Probably the most helpful class I took was the numerical methods, which is a MATLAB-based class, learning, computer programming and how to use not just writing the programs, but the math techniques that are behind it and how that is used for a lot of simulation analysis. But also at John Carroll, we had the junior and senior year advanced lab courses, which were they covered a wide variety of physics topics, but just the general techniques of data analysis and how to, filter out noise and understand the uncertainty in your results and all that. Just general data analysis skills from that are very useful in industry.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks. That's really interesting. Maybe we can even go beyond that a little bit. So oftentimes students learn a lot of things in the classroom, but they also, some of the skills you need to work in industry are maybe things you didn't get in the classroom formally. So maybe can you identify some things that you got from things that were perhaps associated with the university, but not in the classroom that proved to be valuable for you? Any thoughts on that?
Well, with Dr. Kumon, I actually did research in the lab, and that was kind of like my experience with acoustics testing and modeling, being responsible for actual practical problems, solving them day to day in a lab, having to set it up, gather the materials, analyze the results, present them, and also because of the way it worked, having to deal a little bit with the financial aspect. Obviously, Dr. Kumon and the professors took care of most of that, but having to be conscious of that was really prepared me for a business mindset a bit, because that's, exactly what I have to do in my job. I have to be aware of the cost of materials I'm using. I have to get the materials and test them, and I have to log them meticulously and analyze the results. And so that was out of the classroom. I would say that was extremely valuable in preparing me for just operating in my current position.
I think what I found valuable is the work that I did within Society of Physics students, because I think learning how to build a network and create those relationships are really important in industry, because you're constantly working as a team and collaborating, and building those relationships and building that rapport is really important in industry, and how far you really get with the information that you need to get. Sometimes you need to leverage those relationships. So learning how to build those through these conferences and how to meet people, network, I found really valuable when you get in industry. Obviously with the technical aspect, you have to be strong, but from the soft skills, I think it definitely puts you ahead.
Similar theme again. I'm going to cheat a little bit, and maybe it's in the classroom still, but other non-physics classes or or just the non-technical part of like making presentations and communication and knowing your audience, because the presentation that you're going to give is going to be different if I'm talking to other power analysts in my branch versus presenting to project management, and knowing how to gauge how much understanding your audience has and how much detail you need to provide without overwhelming people is really important.
Sure, that's fair. Okay, another question here. And again, if you have questions for the panelists, please put them in the chat box and we'll make sure to get to those. So I was kind of curious to know, so we're talking, you're on the panel here because you didn't go to graduate school right away, at least. So I was kind of curious to know, was that something that you were considering at the time when you were close to graduation? Was that an option for you at all? Or what kind of pushed you one way or another? It's kind of, I think, something a lot of students might struggle with. Any thoughts on that? Maybe tell us your experience.
I would say, I think after graduating, I think when you go into grad school, you kind of specialize in something that you're more passionate about or you want to learn more about. And I think for me, it was understanding what I liked and what I'm strong at and where I needed that specialty. So I think really waiting like a couple of years, and I wish I waited more time after graduating to go to grad school, and understanding what you want to specialize in, I think is important, because if you go right off the bat, you can kind of get into this realm of not knowing exactly what you want to specialize in. So I think that's why I waited, figuring out, is this really what I want to specialize in? So for me, with the pandemic, it was a perfect time to get into grad school. So that's why I made that decision. But I think really waiting and figuring out what you like and what you want to do is important.
Yeah, I would agree with that. You mentioned in my bio, I did an internship during undergrad in like the building industry with fire protection engineering, and then I got a job doing that after graduation. And like 8 months after graduation, I was very convinced that I didn't want to do that the rest of my career. And so it's right, a similar thing, like taking the time to figure out what you're really interested in and what you really want to do before you commit to being really specialized in one area.
It's funny, Spencer. I was in fire protection at the nuclear plant, so I totally get that. Yeah, I guess one practical thing for me is I was just burnt out on school. I definitely considered grad school, but the education courses that I was taking were fairly intense, and I just needed a break and an income. So that was probably the deciding factor for me to kind of push me in. And of course, I had opportunities, which definitely helped. I saw some opportunities for me out there. So I thought I had that reasonable, but really I figured that grad school was an option later. I'd rather take some time, digest what I had learned, and move on later, see what I wanted to do.
I would just add one thing, and I know when you go get your PhD and you try to look at where you can get funding and being supported that way, but I think the same thing can happen with either getting your master's. A lot of times companies will support you a little bit or a lot, but definitely take advantage of that when you can, because you can get through the whole thing fully funded if you just take it one class at a time. But definitely look into what companies do contribute to that, because I think you can save a lot of money that way, and you're not just getting yourself into more debt right after you graduate. So just know that and take advantage of it.
Yeah, my wife's taking advantage of that. I have the option to, but I haven't taken advantage of it yet. A lot of companies have a program like that. Mm-hmm. So you can definitely have kind of the best of both worlds, I feel.
I can imagine, especially if you have student loans from undergraduates, you probably don't want to add to those if you don't have to.
It can be scary for sure. So some people don't know that companies like pay for that,
Okay, this is one I want to direct to Sally. So I'm interested in your experience that you've had in being a woman in science and engineering. Have you faced any challenges in that regard? Physics and engineering tend to be more male dominated, for better or for worse. Have you faced any challenges? If so, how did you manage those challenges?
I think I faced challenges in terms of just kind of being a minority in that field and kind of looking around in a room and saying, well, I don't look like the people around me, whether that's by gender or anything like that. So I think to me that can be challenging, but I kind of go back to that building relationships and networks, and kind of putting yourself into the shoes of someone who I guess doesn't have those challenges and getting the courage to speak up in those types of situations. So I think just building relationships and realizing that not everyone in the room is staring at you because you're the only woman in the room. Just building those relationships I think is important. And I think one of the biggest challenges that I had when I was working in the lab, I had an engineer tell me, he was like, I thought that, he was like, I was a little nervous to have a woman in the lab. I just thought you wouldn't be able to do anything. And he was just being very open and honest with me. But after speaking with him, he was like, you built a relationship with me. You showed me that you were able, and, I'm definitely changing my mindset. So I think it's just winning people over with empathy. I think helps in that field, but I think just having confidence is important. But
Thanks for sharing that. Maybe I can broaden the question out a little bit further. And so I think a university has sort of its own culture, and workplaces have their own cultures as well. So I'm kind of curious to know, what did you have to do perhaps to adapt to going from the university type culture to your workplace culture? So maybe I'll start with Nathaniel. I was under the impression that Akebono is kind of a Japanese company. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
So were there any cultural, sort of American to Japanese sort of cultural issues perhaps, or other cultural issues, workplace cultural issues that you ran across?
It's actually pretty interesting. I have to think. That's a very good question. Obviously, in any company, you have the first thing that leapt to mind is that you have a hierarchy, right? And at a university, in class, you have a professor, but otherwise things are pretty level. But there's a lot of different, in the company, there's a lot of different levels and groups you have to work with. In a Japanese company, it's interesting because a lot of them, that the mother company in Japan, is a lot of the power is centrally located in that corporation. So working with an overseas body that has a lot more power than yours is a very interesting experience, and you kind of have to adapt to that in the way that you request things and the way that you operate within them, that kind of structure, just to make sure that you're being respectful of the way they expect business transactions to happen, and being able to get things done that way. So that's the first thing that leapt to my mind anyway.
Sure, thanks. Maybe Spencer, I'll address this one to you. So similarly, I ended up working at the National Institute of Standards and Technology for a couple of years after I got my PhD. And so I know that there's a different way of doing things in the government. So maybe can you comment about that, working, since you've had experience both in sort of companies and now the government, and maybe even culture of NASA?
Yeah, I'd say that the biggest immediate sort of culture shock thing, at least for me, was, I came from John Carroll, which is a small school. It's like 3,000 students. And the internship I did was like a mom and pop company where the engineering department was me and the guy who owned the company. And then I went to that building design firm, which was like medium size, like maybe 100, 150 employees. And then I joined NASA, which is 36,000 employees. And so just the scale of, suddenly I am a very tiny piece in an enormous machine. Navigating the bureaucracy and different levels and very specific procedures that are set by people either, 10 pay grades higher than me or in Washington, D.C. There's a lot of, you can burn yourself out if you swim against the flow too much. And there are times and places where it's important to do that, and there are channels to do that, but it's sort of accepting the fact that you are you have a place in this organization, and accepting that you're never going to be an expert at everything. We have a saying in general, kind of jokingly, that space is hard. It is, and it takes a lot of detail in a lot of really specific areas, and it's no one can do it by themselves. It has to be an enormous team effort. And so you got to learn how to work within that framework. And it's also a little bit different I guess it would be almost opposite of what Nathaniel was saying, where instead of being, in some ways, instead of having to answer to, in one sense, there are people higher up you need to answer to, but also on Orion, like the spacecraft is actually built by the prime contractor, Lockheed Martin, so we're the oversight. So we have to have meetings with them and review their documentation. We're the ones, they answer to us on that front. So it's kind of a different dynamic.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. Sally, did you want to make any comments on that issue of the workplace culture? I know you worked a couple different places as well.
Yeah, I definitely experienced the same thing as Nathaniel, working for a French company where a lot of the pull is in a different country and a lot of decisions are made, I guess, overseas. And so you kind of don't see some of those decisions being made. So I definitely could relate to those challenges. But I did go from kind of a smaller supplier to a big company like GM. And, people always say there's a lot of politics and things like that. But I think just sticking to the science and the technical stuff and kind of staying focused with that and not really getting involved in the politics, I think is what I've found really valuable, making decisions to make a better product and not just to please someone because of a politic decision. So I think that's definitely something I've experienced.
Okay, let's see. I've got one more question here, and then we'll get some questions here from the chat. So one of the things about university environment is that it's more or less kind of set out. I mean, you may be able to choose your classes, but you get assignments and you turn them in and you have final exams, right? And so there's not a lot that you have to negotiate yourself too much. But I think once you get into the workplace, there's more things you can sort of negotiate. So things like maybe salary or benefits or workplace conditions. So I was kind of curious to know, have you had to do anything like that? How did you deal with that?
Kind of funny you should mention that. I just like a couple of weeks ago kind of took on some new responsibilities. They created this role as the power integration lead within the mission planning and analysis team of the Orion program. And they wanted, because they needed some things, some extra focus on a particular area. So they, Spencer, you would be good to do this. We don't know what the job is. Like, kind of make it up as you go. You sort of a long leash there, but which in some ways is really hard, especially compared to rather than, okay, here's what you need to do. This is your job. Here's an analysis we want you to run. It's okay. We'll decide what analysis. Where is it areas that we haven't analyzed enough? Where do we need more information on? And then, just go work on that. Report back in a few weeks. So that's definitely a new and challenging experience. That's I guess the closest thing I would say, like from a university perspective, would be something like a thesis or a senior project, like just kind of wide open. Pick something you're interested in, go study that. So that's probably the closest analogy, but that's hard, and it's an important skill to be able to figure out.
I think that's really interesting. I think the biggest thing for me was, instead of professors saying you have this assignment and it's due in 2 weeks, people come to you and say, I need this analysis. When are you going to have it done? When can you get it back? So now you're kind of setting your own deadlines, and people have always said, like, definitely pick something, pick a time that's further out than you can actually do it. And then if it gets done early, give it to them early, but never be eager to say, I can get that done in 2 days, because you never know how it's going to go, especially simulation. You can end up saying 2 days, but you really needed a week. So I guess just always say further out. And then if it gets done early, get it to them early. But it's better to play safe than sorry. And then I think what people have a lot in industry is burnout, because they are so eager to say that they can get things done really, really quickly. So I think the best thing is to, give yourself some time to make mistakes, and, give yourself that work-life balance for yourself when people are asking how long things take to get done. Don't burn yourself out if you have the chance to set those deadlines.
I agree with Sally. That can be really, really challenging once you're removed from that kind of framework of here's a set deadline, turn it in by now. Then being able to judge how much time a task should take, and then prioritize it with all the other tasks, and add in a little bit of buffer is a really valuable skill. The one thing I'd add too that's different, as far as it's not exactly negotiating, but like the fact that when working in a company, you're not alone. I find that negotiating who does what is an acquired skill, because in school it's all you, right? You got to get your assignments done for all these. If you have a group project, you probably divvy it up equally, right? But in a company, sometimes when you have shared responsibilities, it can be challenging it can be tempting to say like, well, I don't need help, I'm gonna take on all these things and I can get it done. And like Sally said, when you when you do that and then you say, all right, well, this is going to be a week late now because I took on 7 projects and I can't complete them all, it doesn't look great. So I think being able to go to your coworker and say, hey, I just got these 4 projects assigned to me, or like I took on these, can you help me out with this, and we'll have it done by then. That's something that kind of negotiation happens on a daily basis for me. So
Yeah, and I'll add one go back I thought of along with that. Another thing that I think was a mindset transition is when you're, different assignments are not all the same. And in school it's clear, like, okay, this, the final is more important than this homework. And sometimes it's clear in industry, but sometimes it's not. My branch, we have a sort of a joke. We call it Kerslake's theorem, named after a retired member of our branch. And Kerslake's theorem is that the amount of visibility and importance within the program from your analysis is inversely proportional to the amount of time and effort you spent on it. So the one that you did in an afternoon, like, this would be a quick answer, that's the one that goes to the program manager. The one that you spent a week and a half and really diligently, no one ever looks at that. So that, I think it sort of forces you to be disciplined and make sure that you're always doing your best work, because you don't, it can backfire if you take a risk on, I'm going to slack off on this one because I'm kind of bored today, or I just want to get it over with. You never know, what's going to come back later and which one is going to be really important to the rest of the company.
That's a good one.
Great, thanks for sharing that. I want to get to some of the questions here from the chat. So this one maybe I'll direct to Sally. So the question is, if you went to graduate school after working in industry, did you find it harder or easier to get in? I mean, what was it like to do that application process?
Yeah, I thought it was easier to get in just because a lot of the questions are based on why do you want this degree and how is it going to help you? And actually having that experience in industry and figuring out this is where I'm at, this is where I need to be, and this is the degree I need to get there, I think is really valuable. So having that industry experience, you figure out, okay, I meet these senior experts, they have these degrees, they have this level of knowledge. That's what I really want. So you can kind of vision what you could see yourself in the industry with that degree. So I found it easier because you can leverage off the information. So for example, there is an expert that I worked with and I really wanted to get to where he was at. So it was easy for me to paint my picture of what I wanted after this degree because I already see that. I see mentors that I've worked with that have that experience. So I think meeting mentors is important for grad school, just seeing where you could go with that degree, but I found it easier.
And did you?
But after the break and then going back into school is challenging.
Right, sure. Especially if you're still working at the same time, right? All right, and then another question here. How important is it to work in an industry job related to the field you want to go into graduate school? Anybody want to try that one out? I mean, do you think it's, if you says maybe you're working in one area, but then you want to go to graduate school in another area, or is it better to stick with the same area or try to get a job in an area you want to go into, do research maybe?
Personally, I went into the field that I currently am pursuing and just to get more information But I think grad school is really an opportunity to also change gears. So if I'm in fluid thermal simulation, I really want to go into software engineering. That master's might be my pivoting point to be able to get into that new career. So use that as a leverage point. I think there are no bounds on whether you have to have that previous experience, because that's you getting that experience and putting that effort to bridge that gap. So I don't think there's any limits there from what I've understood.
Sure,
And
sure.
I'll agree with that. I haven't gone to grad school, but just the NASA's program for paying for graduate school, they have a list of, these are critical areas that we want people to get graduate degrees in for our center. Like, these are our areas of expertise. And it doesn't have to be what you're currently working in. You just have to agree that if we pay for, if NASA's going to pay for a master's or a PhD in one of these fields, know that we're going to move you to a branch that works on that. So they're very upfront about it. It doesn't need to be related to what you're working on now, as long as you want to work on that going forward.
Yeah, so as long as it's aligned with their priorities, yeah,
Right.
makes sense.
And I also want to make one note that I majored in applied physics and I went into the mechanical engineering program without having taken any prereqs to bridge that gap. So don't be scared to apply to a program where they say you need all these prereqs, but just talk to the advisor and really see if you need them, because you might not. Your physics background and your problem solving that you did in physics is well enough to get you through many of the prereqs from what I've found. So don't be nervous to apply just because you have a physics degree. You definitely have the experience to apply and do that master's.
I mean, engineering is all physics, right? I'm biased. So let's see, another question. Let's see. It says, it can be overwhelming to get your first job after college. Can you talk a little bit about how you went about getting that first job? That's a great question.
It is a good question. I mean, I think one thing that's worth pointing out is that at Kettering, we did have a big advantage in that we had already had our co-ops. So we had been through this process before. Yeah, I mean, going cold in, maybe I'll let someone else take it while I think, but I think it's important to realize that at Kettering, we had to go through it at least one time during our education as well. And then after school, after we graduated, or near the time, we'd probably apply again, or to the same job that we had been doing as a co-op.
I think it's really about reworking your resume so that, you kind of present yourself not personally, I put my education at the bottom just because if they're looking for a mechanical engineering degree, I'd rather them see my experience doing research, using those different computational tools, using that data analytics in my experience before looking at my education, because they might need that experience, but they're not necessarily skilled or experienced at looking what education fits in. So I would just sell yourself in the best way that you can to fit that role, and just always apply. Even if you don't think that you have all the requirements, just apply anyways and gear your resume towards that job to leverage the skills that you have in the courses and the experience. And research experience gives you so much experience in industry. Just the way that you word it can be really important.
Yeah, I'll second that too. There's no rule that says you have to have one resume. I remember graduating, I was applying to a variety of electrical engineering jobs and the fire protection one that I ended up getting into, and and some aerospace industry jobs, and depending on where I was applying, right, I would do the same thing. Certain more research focused areas, well, yeah, the physics degree looks really good, put that first. Other places you want to focus on the experience. But also I would say, just in general, sort of a scattershot approach. Just, it doesn't hurt to put out more applications. When I got my job at NASA, the NASA Glenn had, in 1 month, that year they posted 30 entry-level engineering positions. I applied for all 30 of them, and I got rejected from 28, but number 29 I got hired. So if you're really trying to get into a specific field or a specific company, don't be afraid to apply for things that don't line up exactly with what kind of similarly what Sally was saying about grad school with prerequisites. So the job posting says that you need exactly 2 years of experience and this very specific degree. Apply for it anyways, because you don't know. Maybe something else on your resume will really stand out. Maybe they don't get a lot of applications, and maybe you sell it really well in the interview. So yeah, don't be afraid to just go for it.
And to add on that, I found that one challenge I had as a physics major specifically is that a lot of companies didn't know what a physics major was. They didn't know what a physics major was or what we could bring to their position. And it can be a bit of a hurdle if in bigger companies where they have like a structured thing where they filter everything very strictly. But to Sally and Spencer's point, that's one of the reasons why some of these companies, I put my education way at the bottom and put all my experience right at the top, much bigger, more prominent. Because when I came to them, they might have been looking for mechanical engineers, but I told them, as like, I can do this thing I've already been doing. And we can do it just as well, if not better, than a mechanical engineer. So don't worry about what it says on my degree. Look at the experience I have. So I guess the key point is don't be dissuaded by the fact that they say that they're not looking for a physics major, because you can get your foot in the door. If you talk to a person and sell yourself, most of the time there's a way to get in, even if you don't meet the exact degree requirements. Sometimes there's not, but it never hurts to try. And the other thing I put out about resumes is, I think, and this is actually kind of superficial, but I think it's overlooked by a lot. Make it look good. I spent, no joke, probably like 12 hours just formatting my resume, and I did make like a new one for everyone, for every company. I tweaked it just a little bit, but make it look good, because when you go to job fairs, or even when you're handing your resume to someone, they're getting, dozens, if not hundreds, of these pieces of paper. Anything you can do to make them look at your piece of paper one more time or 1 second longer, that's key. So make it look good, make it look professional. Add a splash of color, add a little bit of personality. Don't get too wild with it. Make sure it looks professional. But if it's just black and white, single column list of things, it's going to get added to the pile. You could sell yourself, but if you make it look good, when they go back to that pile of resumes at the end of the day, they'll be like, hey, I remember this one. And for me in particular, I actually heard that from several people, that they would comment on my resume, and I think I got a little bit more attention than I would have otherwise. So spend a little time, it'll pay off.
This actually takes you back to my panel session when I was an undergrad. Nathaniel was on it, and he said that he had was it you that said you had a QR code for your LinkedIn?
Mm-hmm.
And that stood out to me so much, because I was like, you know what, if I were a recruiter, I'm looking at all these resumes all day, that's innovative. You know what I mean? Like, someone could just scan it and get to your LinkedIn. That has stuck with me like since. And so I think that's really interesting to like make yourself stand out. Like, that shows that you're tech savvy, you're innovative. So I think that's interesting.
That's wild that you remember that.
Oh,
but yeah,
I specifically do. But I think the biggest thing is just using your network too, like being at these conferences and panel sessions and reaching out to people like, hey, let me add you on LinkedIn. When I look for jobs, it shows who works there in your network. So, I know I met someone at a conference that worked at a job I was looking at. You're not asking them to get you in, but you can ask them, hey, can you look at my resume? Like, do you have any tips for me to get into this company? Because they can't really get you in most of the time, but they can give you advice. So I think that's important too.
There's another question here in the chat, kind of a follow-on to the resume question. What are everyone's thoughts on cover letters? I never needed one previously when searching for co-ops. Are they worth the effort? Thoughts on cover letters?
Personally, I'm a big fan of cover letters. And it's kind of like like Nathaniel was just saying, especially if you're applying for like an engineering job and your degree doesn't say engineering and you're trying to sell yourself. I've found, in my experience, a cover letter gives you a chance to do that. It gives you more space than a resume to write out, here's explicitly why I have the skills to do this job, even if my degree doesn't say the same thing as the job title. So I personally like them. I feel like it's sort of like an elevator pitch on paper. So if it goes with your resume, maybe it gives you that extra look. Again, that could be just me. I know different people have different opinions on them. But even now in my position, like when we're reviewing like summer intern resumes, if nothing else, a cover letter to me shows that like you put in the extra effort, that you were really interested in this company, in this position, not just blasting my resume out to 500 places, even if you really are doing that. So that's my 2 cents. Feel free to disagree, anyone else.
I think the cover letter is good, especially in the case where you're not meeting a recruiter face to face, because it kind of takes the place of that interaction to sell yourself, because your resume is a list of facts. It doesn't explain what you're passionate about. It doesn't explain why you want to work there. And it takes a little bit of effort to gather what you can bring to the company. A cover letter allows you to basically lay that out perfectly in like a 30-second paragraph, why you want to work there, what you bring to the company, and why the list of facts on the next page is relevant, is even worth them reading. I think I've not made a cover letter for a lot of companies that I interviewed with in face-to-face, because I think it kind of substituted for that essentially. But I think they do have an important place. And I don't think they ever really hurt, right? Like if you put a cover letter on and it doesn't get read, you didn't lose much.
I wish they didn't even have cover letters sometimes, because I'm like, unless you just don't repeat what you have in your resume and your cover letter, because like recruiters really don't have time to read. I mean, most of the time, like they really don't have time to like read through everything, from my opinion. Just don't rewrite your resume. Like bring your story, bring your, I'm passionate about this, like bring your personality to the table, because if you rewrite your resume, that's just like a waste of time for them, in their opinion. So
Yeah, that's
cover
a
letter,
really good point.
cover letter, not for the sake of being a cover letter, but a cover letter with a purpose, essentially. Then.
yeah, if you have something to say in it, definitely put it in. If you like have a good try getting that job, or like your resume matches really well, like sometimes you don't really need it, in my opinion. But if you have something to say, like this is your gap, you have a gap year and you want to talk about that, or I have a physics degree and this is why my research applies to this job, like that could be interesting for them.
Okay. I wanted to go back to one of the questions here related to the job search issue. So if you're looking for jobs, are there some red flags or green flags to look for when you're looking through positions? Anything to stay away from, or things that you should be attracted to, perhaps? Any thoughts on that?
Good question.
Yeah.
I think if there's any way that you can reach out to someone who works there, whether it's in your network or not, and just figure out what the work-life balance is there, that's really important, because especially when you go from working so hard in your undergrad, when you were going to industry, you want time for yourself. And, you don't want to be working like 12-hour days all the time, because you're going to really value your personal time. So I think finding that work-life balance and getting that information is really important, because that's your opportunity to actually pursue your passions after work and build those relationships, and not having time for that can be really challenging.
That was the first thing that leapt to my mind as well, Sally, was work-life balance and talking to someone there. If the work-life balance is bad, I think that's a big red flag. You are going to want that time to yourself. No matter how passionate you are about your work, you are going to want some, time to grow your hobbies, your passion, just to relax. And I think a job that requires you to be on 24/7, that's a big red flag for me. I wouldn't do that. They won't ever tell you that. So you really have to kind of have to suss that out through, like Sally said, talking to a person is the best way. there's some sites online that review companies as well with real testimonies from current and former employees that sometimes touch on that. So
Yeah, great. Thanks for those comments. I was kind of curious to know, also as a follow-on with the job search questions. So you mentioned job fairs as one possibility. Have you, and possibly, I guess, online sites. Have you had experience with those, or what do you recommend to students if they want to start looking for a job nowadays? What's the best way to do that? I mean, once you leave the university, sometimes it can be hard, I think, to know where to look, right? There's not necessarily a job fair on campus anymore.
I like LinkedIn has a lot of, I always look on LinkedIn for jobs because you can get a lot more information of who works there from your university, and just gives you a lot more information about that job, I guess, and like the network in that job. That's what I used to get my last job. I really liked it.
LinkedIn is a very good resource. It's very good for looking at networks and just kind of looking around a company a little bit. I don't know. It's been a long time since I've had to apply, so it's hard to answer that conclusively. But even when I was applying, there was a lot of companies that only did online portal applications, and I don't think it. I could be wrong, but I don't see a huge shift in how cover letters and resumes work. Even now, I'm guessing job fairs are probably a little bit less common now in COVID times, but
I have heard that you can go to different universities' job fairs, like try to leverage that. Like Michigan State, for example, I think sometimes you can go to those job fairs even if you don't go to that university. And that can be also a good resource if you go to a smaller university. I know like Kettering has their co-op fair, but by nature of that university, we always did that. But if that's not normal for your university, try to reach out to other universities, see if you can go to their job fairs. I think I've heard that people can leverage that.
Yeah, I mean, another follow-on question here. Also, do you adjust your resume or cover letter if you're applying online versus if you're applying in person? You sort of touched on that, but anybody want to comment on that further? Is that something you've done?
I think I've done that. Kind of like Nathaniel was saying. If you're applying online and you don't already have, if you're not going to interact with a person unless they call you, then I think a cover letter is more important. But also, you just have more time. If you're at a job fair, you don't want to be shuffling through your resumes to make sure that, oh, okay, well, this is the resume I wanted to give to this company, and this is a different one I want to give them. Maybe there's a company there that you've never heard of, and you want to talk to them. But if you're searching online, you see a job posting. Oh, well, this is, I'm really interested in this one. I know exactly what I'm applying for. I know exactly the job and the company, and then you have a little bit more time to make those adjustments.
Great, thanks. Okay, let's see. So I guess maybe we'll do a kind of a catch-all question here as we near the end of the hour. So are there any other recommendations you would have for students, things we haven't yet discussed, who want to pursue employment directly after their undergraduate programs? Perhaps there could be classes they should take outside of physics, or any other soft skills that they should develop, anything we haven't yet discussed. Anything that's perhaps been valuable for you.
I think I can't really stress it enough. Get hands-on experience somehow, be it research, be it co-op, be it a hobby. Get some hands-on experience. Not only would it allow you to put that on your resume and sell yourself, but you will be more effective in the workplace and more confident applying to the places that, like, classroom work is good and everything, but it really, find a way to apply that and use it. That is going to help you so much when you go to work and apply for work.
I think for me, what helped a lot was doing a minor in computer science, because I think it just gives you a little bit more leverage in industry, because I think people are moving more digital and more software based. My brother actually majored in astrophysics, so we both did physics, and he's now in industry as a software engineer. So the way that he got in is when he graduated, he did a lot of computer science classes, which gets you the prereqs to get those jobs. But when he graduated, instead of looking for a full-time job, he looked for an internship. And so you think that just because you graduate, you're ready for full-time, but he said, okay, let me do this internship, get a little bit more experience, and then find a full-time job. So don't be afraid to apply to internships once you graduate. Just because you feel like you're ready to do full-time, there's nothing wrong with doing internships to get your foot in the door and then doing full-time. So also take advantage of that.
The computer thing is big. Learn MATLAB and learn Excel scripting, because I can't tell you how much time I spend in Excel, and the ability to build tools out of Excel instead of just hacking together one spreadsheet at a time saved. I've actually built like entire deployed programs for our company out of Visual Basic is what is the language. I would recommend, I mean, if you think, even if you don't think, learning Visual Basic, learning MATLAB, those, if your company that you go into has access to those tools, you'll probably be using them. And the more proficient you are at them, the better you'll be at your job, essentially. You'll and when you're on the job, you just have less time to learn it, right? You can pick it up piecemeal online, but if you have a little bit of a foundation in school, you'll pick it up so much faster.
Yeah, and along those lines too, I'll say similar computer programming languages are similar to, like, if they say if you learn to speak a second language, the third is so much easier. Similarly, with computer programming, try to learn at least 2 like high-level programming languages, because you don't know what your job is going to use. Dr. Day was really excited when I told him that I got my job at NASA, and I program almost entirely in Fortran.
Oh my goodness.
Which they don't teach anymore. But once you've learned MATLAB and then a little bit of Python, and then Fortran's easy. Or Perl scripts, whatever you need to do for your specific job, as long as you have that experience learning. And I think also, just in general, don't think that you're going to study in school and then you've learned everything and now you go work. Being able to take all of the skills you've learned in studying and then apply them, because your job is probably going to be in some very specific field. It's probably not something that you took an exact class on. In certain industries, but like automotive and aerospace in particular, like your field might be so niche and narrow that you can't get a degree in that. You know, your coworkers are the world experts in this field. And so being able to learn on the job and not be afraid to ask questions and rely on those coworkers and use their knowledge as you get up to speed, I think is a really important skill to keep with you after school.
And not only you have to actively learn at work. You can't just, like, if you want to do well, if you want to climb up in your work, if you want to be in that job for, to make sure that you're an essential part of your workplace, actively learn, seek out opportunities to learn from, I'm in automotive industry. So we have people that I have people that have been working in my company for like 30 years, and they just have this wealth of knowledge. But okay, eventually that person is going to retire, right? And someone has to know what that person knows. And if you have that knowledge, if you pursue that knowledge over years and try, start to gather it, you become that person that you go to. And then when it comes to negotiate a raise or something, you say, well, no one else knows how to use this tool. This other company has a opening, maybe up my pay a little. It puts you in a good place. And if you're passionate about the area you're working in too, learning more about it should be somewhat fulfilling as well. So
I think the biggest thing for me was that as a physics major, that means that I was able to critically think and solve difficult problems with a good approach. Like, that's why I studied physics, and that's what I use for my physics degree, is this idea of critical thinking and approaching problems and breaking them down. And that's really the skill that you get with physics. And that's how you need to sell yourself, because it's a very valuable skill. You know, when you go into industry, you're like, I've done quantum mechanics, you know, I can do this, you know, this is simple compared to the problems that I've solved in my undergrad. That's the kind of mindset that you want to have going in. These problems are very simple compared to the physics problems you've solved in your undergraduate. So just have that mindset and that confidence that, you know, you can solve these issues. It's no big deal compared to what you've done.
Great, great, all great advice. Are there any last questions here before we close out the session today? I think I've exhausted the chat box. Okay. Well, again, I'd like to thank all our panelists. Thanks for taking some time out on your Saturday afternoon here. I think it was a really, really great session. And I had one last request here. If you do want to get an email message about where this will be posted, please put your email address in the chat box, and I'll write that down and make sure you get that information out. Would the panelists be willing to share their contact information?
Sure. How would we do that?
Well, if you can either send it to me by email, or if you're willing to drop in the chat box, feel free to do that as well. And if you want to contact the panelists, you can either, if they're willing to share, then you can contact them that way, or you can contact me and I'll get you in touch with them. Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming out today. Thanks again to the panelists, and hopefully we'll be able to do another session like this sometime in the future.
Yeah,
Thanks
thanks
for having
everyone.
us.
It's been great.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
And Ron, I really like your idea of posting the video of this, because obviously the turnout today was pretty small.